tool I wrote up to kind of automate all this. So, short overview of phishing. I think it's safe to say everyone in this room knows what phishing is. If not, Google. If you also don't know what phishing is, please see me after the presentation so I can get your email address. I can send some stuff to you. So my motivations. I wanted to justify phishing as a useful exercise to clients on penetration tests. A lot of times what we find is that they don't want social engineering, basically because they're faced with a vulnerability that they can't fully remediate. So I wanted to be able to give the client something useful from the test so that we can still use it to really evaluate their security. To do that, I really needed to find a way of gathering reliable statistics for reporting. Now, along the way, when I was building some stuff up, I thought I was actually getting some very useful information, even when people weren't entering information into a capture script. So with ambiguity, let's take a simple exercise. I send out 3 emails to A, B, and C and ask them to log into a web application that I'm running, trying to capture their logins. So let's say in this example, I didn't get any information actually entered in, but I did get 2 requests for the page, so the index page for my web server, and they came from 2 different IP addresses. So with just this information, what's the response rate? How do I report that? Do I know if any of these requests came from forwarded emails? And who were the responses from? As it turns out, you can't actually answer those questions with this information. So we're trying to track down what actually occurred here. One possibility is that I sent an email off to A, B, and C, and A and B went to the site. They basically opened up the email, clicked on the link, but they saw the form there and didn't enter in anything. Or A and C could have done it, B and C could have done it, but with no connection between the two, we don't really know what's going on. You could also have this situation. You could have A who forwarded the email along to D. D clicked on the link and went to the site. B also did. You start to see all these different variations. A could have forwarded to E, and E along to F, and then F could have clicked on the link. You could have had any number of little forwarding variations, but we still ended up with 2 requests to the website, and we don't know who they were from. Go even a step further. A could have gone home after checking his email at work, clicked on the same link, so that's why we get 2 IP addresses in our logs, but they're really from the same user. E could have done the same thing after receiving the email from A, or we could have D and F, who we never sent anything to, but somehow they found our website and they clicked on it. So even with this small example, the number of response scenarios is just infinite. There's too many variations, and we can't really figure out what's going on. So let's say we send out 100 emails and we get 100 responses. Did one guy respond 100 times, or did each person respond once, or was it somewhere in the middle, or were they even involved with the phishing scheme to begin with? Now, without some method of actually identifying where these responses are coming from, we can't really figure anything out. With larger response sets, it becomes a little more difficult to track down all the variations, but it's just as impossible, really. Now, just a note, to be fair, with these examples we're using with 3 emails sent, it's not really enough to do much with because you just don't have enough responses. But most phishing schemes, not talking about spear phishing yet, the focus is on a large number of emails being sent out, so you're kind of playing the probabilities. So in the wild, we don't really have attribution as an important issue. An attacker doesn't care who responds. They don't care if it's from a forwarded email. They don't care if it's someone entering in credit card information or whatever. They just want that response. And unfortunately, testers tend to take that same perspective. When you're sending out phishing emails, all you want is at least one person to come back and give you their domain credentials. If you send out 1,000 emails and you get one guy's credentials, victory. Clients find that somewhat less useful because they can't fix everyone, and there's always going to be someone who responds. For reporting purposes, if you're actually building up something for a client, attribution is critical. We want to know which emails got responded to. We want to know when they got responded to, from where, how often they responded. And we can use this information to generate some very useful statistics for them. An important note, though, because most of the time when you're dealing with phishing, People are typing in their credentials or their credit card information. We don't want to just stop there. We want to actually get responses, like half responses. So someone going to the website, but not entering in their information. Reason being, there are lots of mean things you can do to someone if they just go to your website. They don't have to enter in any information. You can still, take advantage of a vulnerability and push down some malware. So if a user's clicking on a phishing email link, just clicking on that link is dangerous enough. To accomplish this, we use a tagging technique. So when you're tagging emails, you're manipulating the message contents to where you can track the responses you receive from that specific email. When someone clicks on the link, they're sending information to you that you can distinguish from other responses. With this information, you can really isolate who's responding, and you can start to track down some other information. So some examples of tagging we can use. You could have every URL in each email going to a unique IP address. Somewhat hard to set up, but it would still work. You could have each email pointing to a unique port. Again, kind of tricky to set up. You could have the actual URLs that they're clicking on have some sort of key parameter that identifies the recipient, or you could have them go to a unique resource. And towards the end, I'll show you some examples of those two. So if you look at a port-based example, I send an email off to A, and the link that we have in it points to port 8081 on my web server. I send an email off to B, and I point it to 8082. When I get a request on my web server for 8081, I can distinguish between A and B. Ideally, this probably isn't the best method to use because someone running a port scanner on you, you're going to get a lot of false responses. Using a file-based example, you can set up symbolic links for a bunch of unique files, point them to the same one so that later on you can just edit one file and change the responses to everyone. But if I send out index A to address A and index B to address B, if someone's coming in and requesting indexb.html, most likely they're not just scanning for random files. Important thing to note, when we're tagging, it doesn't mean that we're catching the actual person that is responsible for that email address. We're just catching that there's a response to that email that we sent out. So we're not able to isolate individuals, but we can start to build up ideas of what's going on. Like I said with the port-based example, obviously you don't want all your statistics thrown off if someone runs a port scanner on you. So tags should be unique enough that they can adequately eliminate guessed or false responses. So some tagging schemes are better than others. You can use combinations of these two, various tagging schemes, to kind of start isolating some of these. For example, you can use port-based and file-based. So the odds of someone running a port scanner on you and also requesting indexe.html is somewhat less. You can use numeric identifiers, so you give every email a unique number that's most likely not going to be guessed by random people. You can start to limit the false responses. But as we can see, we can start to infer other details about what's going on. So let's take our original example. So instead of just sending out emails A, B, and C, we include these tags in the emails. So we have tag A being sent to email A, tag B going to B, and so on and so forth. Again, same response scenario. We get 2 requests to the website just for basically the page. Both of them contain requests for tag A, and we didn't get any information entered into the actual capture script. So with this information, we can actually answer some of these questions a little better. The response rate, 33%. We sent out 3 tags, 1 of those tags responded, so that's a 1/3 response rate. Again, we don't care that there were 2 requests from A. We can just say, based on the number of tags that we sent out, the number of people that are causing a response based on the email sent. Were any of the requests from forwarded emails? Yeah, we can actually say there's a high probability because the unique tags were received from 2 distinct IP addresses. And we'll get to that in more detail here in a sec. Who were the responses from? Well, we can say that responses were received from the email address that we sent tag A to. We can't say it's from one person or any group of people, but we can start to limit it to that. So that last question is still a little tricky to answer. So let's look at these scenarios again. none of these scenarios could have occurred because B, in the first example, far on the left, B doesn't have tag A. And since our tagging technique is sufficiently difficult, they're not going to guess it. There's no way he could actually send that request to us with tag A. Same thing from the other two scenarios. C wouldn't know tag A, and neither B or C would know tag A. Same time, second scenario is possible here because the email forwarded along to E and then to F would contain tag A. So F could send a request to us with tag A. The other two scenarios, for the same reason, B doesn't know tag A and C doesn't know tag A, so they can't actually send those requests. For the last one, the first two scenarios are working for the same reason. A, if he checks his email at home and at work, he still has the same tag in his email. But again, we can remove D and F because they never would have received any information from the people we sent the emails to. So tags really eliminate a lot of the possible scenarios, but not all of them. We can eliminate things like a single user going and sending multiple requests from different locations. We all know users, they tend to be a little flaky. If it doesn't work on one computer, somehow it will magically, mystically work on another one. So that tends to be a problem. With larger response sets, differentiation becomes a little bit easier, though. The more responses we have, the more we can try and figure out what's going on. From a reporting perspective, being able to say that there's a high probability that an email was forwarded, it's still a hell of a lot better than we have no clue whatsoever. So it's still very useful already. And we can be more conclusive about some of our statistics. Our response rate. Just being able to report on a very conclusive response rate is very useful. We can start to look at things like fastest and average response times as well. We can go a step further because all the information we have now, we have the tag that we sent out, and that's coming back in our responses. We have the times of the request, and we have IP addresses associated with the response. So you pull all that information together, and let's summarize what we know even from this basic scenario. I sent an email off to A, and it was accessed from 2 different IP addresses. So the user who checks A might be forwarding phishing emails. Well, that's very useful if I'm going to run a follow-on attack. If we send some sort of exploit code to A, through an email attachment, whatever, it could end up affecting multiple machines. So we could start getting more machines compromised. We also know that emails to B and C did not get any responses, so it's not really worth targeting them afterwards. We know that it took X minutes for their first response to come in when we send an email to A, and Y minutes for the second response. That could be useful for us. If it's right after one another, we know they're probably being forwarded because there's no way he's going to change his email that rapidly. If we have our web server logs configured right, we also know which type of browsers are sending the request to us. Again, very useful if we're going to run follow-on attacks. By looking at the source IPs that we're getting requests from, we can start to figure other things out. If both our IPs are on the same network, we can probably guess whether or not this is a forwarded email or what's going on. If they're 2 separate networks, again, if it's one user checking from multiple locations, it's a little trickier. If they're not on the same network, though, who owns them? Are they owned by different ISPs? Are they owned by different companies? Are they owned by France? We don't know, but it could be useful. So to try and figure some of this stuff out, we start using an intuitive approach. And we can start to determine the most likely situation based on the responses we got. Assuming, of course, that we have enough raw data. 3 responses, it's anyone's guess. Couple examples. If we're getting, it's more likely that if we get 20 different responses from 20 different computers, it's more likely that someone forwarded the email to 20 people than that one user going to 20 different machines and clicking on that same link. After 5, they probably would have figured out what's going on, so it's not likely they would have done that. If every response we receives comes from a single IP address, though, it's more likely that we're dealing with the proxy host instead. So everyone that's clicking on the link on their machines, the request is coming to us from some sort of proxy. That's more likely than one user getting 20 different emails forwarded to them, clicking on the links in each one of them, so that all the requests for all these multiple tags come from one IP address. Now, granted, we can't eliminate all of these possibilities. They're still possible, but they become less and less likely. Now, not all of our assumptions will be correct. That's a given. But they do give us much better odds for follow-on attacks. So we run a general phishing scheme. Using that information, we build up a spear phishing target. So this is the kind of information we can get. We can start to determine additional hosts that are possibly accessed by a user. Remember, if we get a request for a single tag from multiple IP addresses below some sort of determined threshold, we know that that user is checking on multiple machines. For forwarded emails, if we receive requests for a single tag from multiple IPs above a determined threshold, and I'll talk about thresholds here in a minute. For inattentive or susceptible users, people who might be worth targeting on follow-on attacks, really fast response times. If I send out an email and 3 seconds later someone's hit my website because they're clicking on the link, they're probably not reading the email. That tends to be a good thing for us. Multiple hits in a short amount of time. If someone's clicking on the link and, wow, it doesn't appear to work, so they click on it again and again, maybe enter in their password because maybe they mistyped it the first time, and then they enter it in again. Those are users that we want to target for follow-on attacks. Or if we get requests for tailored schemes like Big Red Button. And I'll show you what Big Red Button here is here in a minute. We can start isolating proxy servers. If you're running a pen test, you might want to know which hosts are worth targeting and which hosts aren't. Whether or not you'd want to target proxy servers is up to you. But again, if we get multiple tag requests from one IP above a determined threshold, we can start to figure out that that's probably a proxy server. Social networks. If we can determine forwarded emails, or if we get cross-tag responses from different IP addresses. So IP address 1 requests tags A and B, and IP address 2 requests tags A and B. There's probably some sort of communication path between the two. And finally, the more interesting one, hosts accessed by administrators or by help desks or other key personnel. And we can start to pick those out from multiple tag requests from a single IP below a determined threshold. Remember, if it's above this threshold, we're probably going to consider it a proxy. But if we have just the right number of requests and we're receiving requests along other communication paths, we can start to figure out something's interesting about that host. So social networks and administrative hosts. Let's first talk about forwarded emails. So I said a forwarded email, we can start to determine when we get the same tag requested from multiple IP addresses. So this is our scenario. We send out 3 emails to A, B, and C, each with their individual tags, and we get this response. .1, .2, .3, and .4 all send back a response for tag A. Well, this could have happened. A, who logs into .1 to check his email, could have sent the response to our server and then forwarded the email along to his cohorts who are on .2 and .3 and .4, and they all responded to the email as well. Alternatively, it could have gone through a different forwarding path. A could have clicked on the link, sent it along to someone else who forwarded it and kept on forwarding it. So you can start to see there's a lot of different variations, but could this have happened? Any ideas? Could A have sent a request from 4 different IP addresses? Yes, they could have. One scenario, they checked their email in their office, and then they went to their friend's office and checked it from their computer. Then they changed the IP address manually, and then suddenly they requested DHCP handles again and got a different IP address. So it's possible. Very unlikely, though. Basically what we have is a unique tag mated into an email client on multiple IPs. Yes?
Have you considered using images, caching, browser caching, to determine if it's the same computer? Because they're not going to request the same image twice. It'll be cached.
No, that's actually a very good approach.
Do I get a book?
I don't have any books. You can have a piece of candy if you want. In any case, so we have unique tags being made into email clients on multiple hosts. And the users are clicking on a link or some other method that sends the tag to the server.
But when you said
Yes, it could. No, I said that could actually happen. I said it's unlikely, though. It's more likely that it was forwarded to other users. We're kind of dealing with probabilities here. The fact that the request originated from several different hosts allows us to guess what might likely would have occurred. And we really don't care how many times the email got forwarded. You could change those forwarding paths up any number of different ways, but the email still probably got forwarded. And so we can start to answer the question, did this email get forwarded? Very useful for a client. In addition, if we know or somehow guess that B is logging into .2 and C is logging into .4, and then we have evidence that A, B, and C have some sort of communication path in common. So this would be a potential social network. So here's an example of what a social network might look like on the back end. We get our 3 responses for tag A, B, and C, and then a tag from .4 as well. So you have these 3 users who are forwarding emails in between each other. So those tags are being distributed between them. So they could click on any number of those links, and we'd get the different tag requests. Notice I included .4 in there just to make sure we aren't getting all the tags being requested from a single IP address. Otherwise, we'd probably consider that a proxy, even just with 3 emails. So administrative hosts. These are probably more useful for testing, because if we can determine administrative hosts, those are the ones I really want to target. Because if I can get in there, I've got probably better privileges than normal users. So say we send out our 3 emails. We get our responses from .1 with tags A, B, and C. And then we get a request for tag A from .4. So this is a possibility of what went along here. A replies, but then forwards the email along to his network admin because he thinks, oh, I didn't actually click on that link, did I? I should probably report this to security. B does the same thing, sends it along to the network admin, and C forwards it to someone else who forwards it to the admin. So the administrator gets these multiple emails into his inbox and starts to look at them and go, I need to try and figure out what's actually going on here. And he goes through and he clicks on the links, thinking that, okay, if I get a form, I'm not going to enter in any information. But just by requesting those links, we get the tag information from them. So we can start to determine that maybe the person on .1 is an administrator because he has knowledge of all of these different tags. Alternatively, A could actually be the administrator. So all these people are forwarding information along to A, and he clicks on those links. So we can't really isolate who the administrator is, but we do know that .1 is most likely being used by an administrator or a help desk person, so we don't have to necessarily say administrator. So if we look at the situation of multiple tags coming from a single IP address, it could be a number of things. It could be a request proxy. People's requests for web pages are being sent through a single host. Could be that the user's part of a social network, so he gets emails from all his colleagues and goes and, for some odd reason, clicks on all the links in those emails as well. Or it could be that a user's an administrator or has some other important role that we might find useful and is investigating a potential security issue. Depending on how many emails we send and how many responses we receive, the analysis could be different. So when I mention these thresholds, they're not really thresholds we can set at some sort of static point. It has to be relative to what we've sent out and what responses we're receiving. So if I send out 3 emails and I have my threshold for a proxy being 50 responses from a single IP, it would never reach that threshold. But if we have a large number of responses, say like 75% coming from a single IP address, it's unlikely that an administrator would respond to so many of those phishing emails. And even if they don't know what's going on in the emails, it's just unlikely they're clicking on so many links. So we can probably list it as more likely a proxy. Again, we can't eliminate the possibility that someone's clicking on those links that many times, but it's just less likely. So to give an idea of some static thresholds we might send, if an IP address responds to 2 tags, it could just be from a single forwarded email. So they got an email forwarded it to them from someone else who's also gotten that same email. So we get 2 different tags. 3 tags, more likely from someone receiving multiple emails, but it could still just be a social network. But if they receive 5 tags, most likely it's coming from some sort of administrator or help desk personnel that's doing some probing. So determining the thresholds, we got to do that based on the individual task and how many emails were sent along. Size matters, as with phishing. I once caught a fish this big. Too few emails, skewed statistics. We can't do much with it. And it's also not likely to catch social network memberships. So we need a good sample size. Like most phishing schemes, if you just send out 10 emails and you're getting a 1% response rate, that might not be very useful. Send out 1,000, you get much better results. Ultimately, we want a decent number of targets, each with a unique tag, and we need to be able to craft individual emails to those people. That's a very cumbersome task to be doing manually. We also need to be able to handle the responses, so we need some sort of process running in the background and checking these responses, not something you want to do by hand. So, when in doubt, write software. So what I wrote up was an application that kind of handles building of the phishing schemes and then also sending them out. So I'll walk through what the tool can do, and then we'll run through some examples. So we've got the ability to create these schemes, so these very generic schemes that aren't necessarily focused on a single client, but we might want to reuse that template over and over again. What we do is we supply some subject lines that we might use to send out in the email. So the application will pick a random entry from the subject lines. And this can prevent people from isolating a specific email based on a subject. Then we give it an HTML template that's going to contain the information that gets sent to the user. And notice we've got all these little kind of placeholders. So I don't want to manually go through and plug in these tags each time I send an email. We're going to have the application do it for us. And we can then preview it just to see what it's going to look like when they receive it. So once we have all our templates built up, we can go through and actually build a task. So we're going to send some emails out to a list of target addresses, and we're going to give it a mail server that we're going to send through, and pick which templates we want to actually send them to. So what I did was I built up a sample. So we're sending to user 1, user 2, and user 3, and we're sending all of the schemes. So I can show you what some of these templates look like. So we can actually go through then, because they might be just templates, and we don't really want to send out these generic messages. We can go through and edit the templates just for this specific task. So we still have our base templates that we can reuse over and over again. But say we have a specific agency we're targeting or a specific bank. We can then focus the emails in on those targets. And once we have all that information together, we can go through and click the Activate button, and it's ready to go. So I've already done that. So once we've got our emails sent out, it's got this really quick task status check. So we can see, have we sent all the emails we were supposed to? How many hits have we actually gotten so far? So you can see at this stage we've got 21 emails sent. This is because I sent lots of different schemes out to 3 emails. Show you what some of them look like in the email client. So this is big red button. It says do not push. You'd be surprised how many users push the button. Show you some of the other ones and how we're actually using the tagging scheme to get some of these pieces of information. So this is lost iPod. The user gets an email basically saying, hey, I lost this iPod. Please email me if you found it, or something along those lines. Now what's going on in the email so there's actually 2 things that are going on here. First of all, the image itself is being loaded up from a script on our server. And when they send the request for that image, it sends their tag. So even though they haven't entered in any information, inside their email client, they might have gone up and clicked load this image. Most email browsers won't actually load external images by default, but any user that does, we might want to look into them and send them another email afterwards. Additionally, then they have the link they can click on, which sends the tag to us yet again. So we know someone's actually clicked on this link. And for this scheme, we have them say, oh, your request couldn't be processed. Please log back into this server first. Another interesting one, just a link. So I mentioned we were using two different tagging approaches here. They receive this email. We're not even obfuscating this link at all. It's the same link it's pointing to. But it's just going to an HTML page. People are likely to click on it. But when they do, they don't actually go to anything. There's no file on our server that's actually named that. But meanwhile, in our web server logs, there's a GET request for that URL. So I have a script in the back end that's just going through and processing those logs. And anytime I see a valid script, I can update the statistics for that scheme. And finally, big red button. Again, the image is loaded up from a CGI script, so they send along the tag. And if they click on the link, they just go to a website that pops up a bunch of JavaScript alerts and annoys them for a couple seconds. But what we've determined here is we know the people who actually loaded up the button image, and we also know users that are clicking on a large red button that they received in their email that says, do not push. I really want to send more emails to that person. So once we actually have all of these responses, we want to start gathering them together and building up reports. So I ran an even larger scenario. Basically, I wrote up a script that simulates responses to all of these emails based on random probabilities. So a user might have a 30% chance of sending a GET request. They have a 50% chance of just deleting the email altogether. And then it just directly adds the responses into the database. So some of the information we've been able to report on. We can say that we sent 50 emails. The responses we received altogether, hits, gets, posts, not necessarily information entered into a capture script, but we got 362 responses. Our response rate, 49 out of the 50 tags sent requests, so we can say it's a 98% response rate. Estimated distribution rate. Notice I'm not saying the forwarded rate, because when you're getting two requests from, one request for a tag from two IP addresses, we can't really distinguish that from a forwarded email versus the same user checking on multiple hosts. So we call it a distribution rate because it's ending up on multiple hosts. In this case, we were able to determine that 30 of the 50 tags got forwarded or checked from multiple hosts. Our quickest response time, 10 minutes. That's useful. Average response time, 30 minutes. We couldn't find any potential proxies, but we picked out 20 potential administrative hosts. Now, for the purposes of this simulation, the way I had it set up, users 1 through 10 are administrators. All the emails are like user1@test.com. For the IP addresses I have the users mapped to, they all come from something dot their user ID. So 192.168.0.11 was what I determined was, or it was what I set up for the simulation as user 11's IP address. So I was testing to see whether we could actually pick it out from the responses. Here you see your half-hour request rate. That's actually fairly typical for a phishing scheme. You get a lot of responses in the beginning, and then they tend to tailor out. People just stop responding after a while, or they've already responded and no one's forwarding. So that's a good indication that the simulation kind of went as a normal phishing scheme would. So the first thing we try and do is map primary IP address to email address. We want to try and determine which IP address is actually owned by a certain user checking a certain email address. And there's a variety of heuristics we used for this. Going through, we can see it tended to do pretty well. 11, 12, 13, all of those users mapped together. Not all of them are correct, though. You can start to pick out occasionally when an administrative host is involved, it gets a little confused. Well, that's fine. 90%, we're still okay with that. For the detected browsers, we just basically go through our logs, pick out the string that gets their browser, and map it to the IP address. Again, this is useful. We can start figuring out which ones are Linux hosts, which ones are probably Windows. We might set those into a different target list if we have exploit code that we want to send out through an email. Social networks. This is kind of a quick list, so if I have an IP address or a specific user, we can start to see just a list of other email addresses that were determined to be in their social network. We can start listing out all the individual requests we received from different IP addresses, so the number of gets, the number of posts, and also the number of possible probes. If we start getting a lot of requests for invalid tags from a certain IP address, we're going to list those as probes. If we get a large number of probes, it's most likely someone who's playing around with you or an administrator that's looking into what's actually going on. If we look over here on the notes section, we can see 5 tags were responded to by this host. And for this situation, we set a threshold of around 3. If there were more than 3 tags responded to, we're going to flag that as administrator. If it was under 3, we'll make a note of it, but it's most likely just someone responding to forwarded emails because it's a kind of a closed simulation. But we can see it picked out .1 as being a potential administrative host. You can see it also picked out 3 through 9. So we were able to pretty much get all of the administrative hosts off this simulation. We picked out a lot of other ones as well. You can start to see this one responded to 2 tags. So we might list it as interesting, but that's not going to be our primary target. Finally, we can start listing out potential social networks. So we're going to check for which tags were responded to from which IP addresses, and we're going to start to determine heuristically what's most likely going on. When we're determining the IP address to email address relationship, we're looking at things like who was the first tag that got responded to on this email? Was it the most responded to on that IP address? So someone's more likely to click on a link that was sent to them rather than something that was forwarded to them from some random other person. So once we have all that information, we start determining tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 relationships. And we can start building out potential network maps of social networks. So here we see that user 11 has a strong connection with user 17. The tag that was sent to user 11 ended up on an IP address that we've determined is primarily owned by user 17. And for the purposes of this simulation, we were having all the emails only forwarded to people in that same little area of users. So users 10 through 20 were all involved with each other in a social network. So user 17, that's a valid response. Some of it we're not so sure about, so we listed out. Yes? Oh, sorry, you're right by the light.
If I understand correctly, this is an experiment where you set up probabilities for responses and so forth.
Right.
You haven't actually fished anybody here.
No, just for the purposes of demonstration, so I could fill in the information.
So what underwrites your assumptions about the way users behave? I mean, why would you think that a user would forward some message from like a fake chase to their friend?
Oh, we're not basing it on anything likely like that. We're just saying if we receive tags from multiple IP addresses, we can probably say there are more scenarios that occurred from a forwarding situation than someone randomly guessing a tag that's 20 random characters long.
I mean, is that a common enough scenario to be meaningful? I mean, it wouldn't be meaningful if it actually happened. But is there
Yeah.
any evidence suggesting that?
Yeah,
It's common.
very common. And we've actually run this on client sites and been able to determine social networks.
Phishing landing page internal?
Actually, the application itself is pretty portable. We've run it internal and external. It just basically determines on which mail server you're going to send things through. The other problem, if you're internal and someone forwards to an email address that's outside the network, they're not going to be able to click on the link and get an actual response. Red shirt.
I just have to question the assumption that all users are going to be connected to the internet directly. I mean, most organizations are going to be behind a NAT or a proxy.
Right.
Isn't that going to skew the
No, because we're detecting proxies. We're trying to determine whether these are valid responses.
But you're not going to find the source IP address. All the statistical analysis you're doing is going to be accuracy.
Yeah, if you're running it external. What we try to do is do phishing schemes internal and external, so we can start to get a better picture. Externally, though, you're not really able to get internal addresses, although there are some tricks you can play with the actual web page they're requesting. So using PHP and trying to get the local address. It's not as reliable as it should be, but sometimes you are able to do that. Yes?
Just to follow up to the points made, how realistic is it to run an internal phishing scenario? That doesn't seem like it happens a lot.
Why not? Well, if you've got an internal host that's compromised, and someone sets up a scheme like this on a web server that they've compromised, they could be running internal schemes and then checking it remotely.
So just probability-wise, it seems highly improbable versus external
Yes.
phishing scenarios.
It is far less probable that they're running it internally.
And another note on the forwarding emails, what we see in the news out there, what seems to be working on phishing is more the targeted spear phishing attacks than the random spam-like phishing.
Right.
And if you went down the paradigm of spear phishing attacks, where they're like, hey, dear Tom, and there's something related to you, how likely are you to forward that?
Exactly. And that's one of the primary reasons we use this. So for example, if you look at this situation right here with user 11 and user 17, if I've been able to build up this network, this mapping, based on just sending them an email and having them accidentally include an image, which people are likely to do, if I can build up this information based on those responses, the next thing I do is I send an email to user 17 from user 11. So I use this to build up a spear phishing attack. So the problem with spear phishing is you have to generate enough useful information to actually send out something that's very focused. We can start to use this to eliminate a lot of the extraneous emails that would be sent out. For example, 192.168.0.1. We've kind of determined that's an administrative host. So if I want to get something onto that administrative host, I see that user 17 is connected to that host. But to get to user 17, I might target user 11 because he tends to have a strong social communication network with user 17. So I can build up a more focused attack afterwards. And I can also see which types of schemes are being responded to. If I send out an email that says, click on this link so you can enter your credit card, no one responds to it. Or I send out one that's really kind of, including some image that people are most likely going to click on, something that says spring break pics or something like that. I can start to see which schemes are actually getting responses and measure those statistics against them.
So you're still writing the assumption, though, that a plain spam-like phishing attack is going to see a lot of forwarding so you can capture all this information.
Well, if it goes viral, yeah. But it's not necessarily the case that all emails will get responded to. Like I said, big red button, we've sent that out, and we've actually had people clicking on the button. Far fewer responses than when we send out an email that says, hey, there's been a security alert, please check your domain credentials here to make sure your account hasn't been compromised. So you still have to be clever about your templates. Yes?
Two crossway comments on what you've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
First, big red button mail says, do not click this button.
Mm-hmm.
Your psychology shifts to think, admin said, don't click on things in email, and they click, that's spam. That kind of email elicits, hey, this is probably a good joke, let's see what happens.
Even better.
Nonetheless, that gets you into that. On the spear phishing, I do have a question. How deeply you trace into crafting the kind of spear phishing? Good, relevant information content spear phishing would on its next cycle likely elicit more significant than social network community of interest on top of it.
True, yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, could you repeat the question a little louder?
A well-crafted spear
Oh.
phishing email, which
He's got a microphone.
Thank you. A well-crafted spear phishing email, and by well-crafted I mean one that has intriguing or interesting content for your
Right.
target.
And is relevant specifically to them and not to just
Yes,
a random
is highly likely to be forwarded to a community of interest on that topic, which is an even more valuable analysis set than the social network that you can get from other forwarding information. And so I was wondering if you had extended that far into any of your real encounters.
Not yet. we're still trying to actually build up trust relationships with the clients, because so far they don't really like phishing to be run in general. Showing that it's useful from this stage then leads up to follow-on phishing emails that they'll allow us to send.
Yeah, because the real-world spear phishing examples that I have been aware of are very carefully crafted with relevant and important content to the target.
Right, and remember, this is just based on responses that we don't have any other information. Some of these users are actually entering in domain credentials. Some of them are, their emails are self-explanative. If I get an email from admin at something, it's most likely an administrator. I don't need to go through all of this hoopla. But the other important thing I wanted to note too, I'm running close to time here. What this is primarily used for is to be able to report on things to a client. This additional network mapping is really what I'm focusing on now, because I want to make it more useful to the penetration testing process. But one thing you can do is provide these statistics to a client, have them go through their user education training, and then run the same sort of test later and see if their response rate decreases. So from that perspective, it's actually been fairly useful to clients. I have a couple minutes left. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Have you considered using some marketing tools? I used to work in a situation where we had advertisers who would send out targeted emails to users. A lot of the things as far as the statistic generation, they've already created very similar tools.
Right.
There might be something that you can leverage to make your statistics better.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this was, right now what I'm actually doing is trying to focus in the heuristics a little easier. You can see there's a lot of guessing right now. I'm trying to figure out whether there are better thresholds to set on certain levels. So I'm actually going in and doing more statistical analysis. The other thing to note is that we're basing this on a sample. So anyone who's familiar with statistics is you can draw a lot of information based on the sample size versus the population size. So that's some of the research I'm currently doing is really focusing in on the relevance to the larger population. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Power this off.
So in 12 minutes,
Yeah.
we'll start up again with
Hold on.
building an all-channel Bluetooth monitor.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent idea. Thank you.
Proprietary. I noticed there was a tag on it. Is that proprietary?
This specific version is pretty proprietary.
Okay.
But what I wanted to show is that the methods for writing this stuff is pretty simple. Honestly, I wrote this pretty much in a night. Well, I was drinking a lot too. But once you just start to figure out what you can draw from these conclusions of, you have a scheme where you can tag the